Here we are with the head somewhat done. The knitting part is done. I have come to the conclusion that if you can knit this head and stay with it and stay with all the color changes, you can just about knit anything. This is tedious in a way because you're working in a small area. So I cannot encourage you enough to just stay with it. If you get frustrated, lay it down for a little bit. There's just a lot of things to think about. I got to knitting and there wasn't a good spot to stop. And so I thought, you know what, I'll do better by just going ahead and getting it knitted. And then we'll talk about it. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about it. So I just want to remind you, if you're new to Intarsia, each one of these color changes, you're making a small ball like this, and you're adding an individual color so that when you go to the next color, then you're on a new ball. And so at some point in time on this, we were at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different, maybe 6, no, I think it was 5 different balls hanging. And you know, you do your best to keep it kind of straightened in the back, but don't let that get you frustrated. Every once in a while you just stop and untwist it. Or I actually found when I was sitting in my infamous recliner chair where I like to knit, it was kind of easy to keep the balls separated out more than what it is here on the table. So it actually went smoother than when I was sitting here on video. But that's my best, is just my best advice, I should say, is be patient. Don't be in a rush. Take your time. And if you haven't started the head yet, you will find out shortly why I'm saying just take your time, be relaxed. If you have to take some rows out, take some rows out, because you're never going to make, like these stitches here are very directional, and if not made according to, and there's up here around the eyes, to the pattern, then you won't have nice smooth transitions there. The other thing I will say is when you're working on these stitches here and you're on a purl side, I have found that when I go to do that stitch from the purl side, I simply turn my work around so I'm actually observing it from the knit side. Then those stitches for me are much easier to see and make, and they just come together. If I only look at it and try to do it from the purl side, you can't really see what you're doing, right? And so by turning around and making that stitch from the front side, and you'll understand when you get to that spot in the pattern, that really helps me to just turn my work around so I can see what I'm doing. So we're done. Obviously we start, just so if you haven't started your head, this is the picture. You're starting back here at the back of the head and you end up here at the front. So you're knitting from the back to the front, unlike the first book, which you were knitting from the neck up and you were stopping right up here. So this is very different from that regard. So then you get a lot of little yarn ends dangling, and I have finished off this side. I left this side undone so you could see what that looks like. This is what it looks like all tucked in. One thing I like to do when I'm weaving in my ends, I like to stay close to the line where the color change happens rather than weaving it out here in the bigger, flatter areas. I think you can get kind of a puckery look if you weave it in these big open areas, but not so noticeable when you stay close to the color change edge. So that's what that looks like. And of course I've already finished off a lot of them, so you can imagine what this looks like from the other side. But before you go any further, and I will finish these off before I begin to close this head up. But all in all, you know, you feel real good about yourself if you get this head done with all these different colors on it. That's a big deal. Okay, now I have repositioned my needles on the body, and I have half of the stitches on each needle, but they were going from shoulder to shoulder. Now I've got them positioned so they're front to back, and that's going to line up with these stitches that I've picked up on the head. I just determined this was the area that the neck was going to fit in, so I have the same amount of stitches on each needle as I do here on the body. So now we want to line up the head. So of course the nose is pointing forward. Very, very important. I've decided not to put any stuffing in the head at this point in time because I do have this little opening here, and I'm going to have this opening here that have to be sewn up, so there's just no need to put stuffing in yet. And I'm actually going to show you how I reinforce the neck so the head is not wobbly. But right now we're going to concentrate on how we're going to get these stitches matched up and sewn together. Now I had actually thought that a 3-needle bind off would work. However, to do a 3-needle bind off without getting any ridge, everything has to be turned inside out. Well, I can only do that. That doesn't work. You can only do it on one side of the stitches of the head. The other side, you'd get that little ridge that you get on the inside of 3-needle bind off, and it would actually end up on the outside of the one side of the head. I know that's a lot of words, very confusing, but 3-needle bind off just won't work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be picking up needle and thread, part of my yarn, with a needle, and we're just going to match stitch for stitch and sew those together. And get my good needle over here. Here is my live yarn right here, and I'm going to cut myself off, hopefully plenty, because I may end up going around it twice. There may be a loose stitch that I need to tighten up the tension. We'll just have to see how it comes together. One thing I want to remind you, and I really failed, I really cut this white yarn too short. I should have given myself a little more generous piece because I want the white to sew this part up, and this little piece that I left myself is not adequate, so I'll have to add a little piece in there, and that's fine, it'll work. But just note to self, be generous when you're cutting those end pieces. You just never know when you might need to use one. Okay, so get myself lined up here. Here is my live yarn, and I'm going to go through this first stitch on the needle closest to me, slip it off, go right in to the next stitch on the back needle, slip it off, and hopefully not catch all the needles on the way, and snug this up. Okay, now you can't really do much if you find you've got a loose stitch. Not much you can do with it right at this point in time. That might be something that we just have to repair when we come back. Just double check you've got everything going correctly. And now we're going to come back over to this kind of the process that we do when you do the 3-needle bind off. Whether you go in from the back forward, I don't think it's going to make a lot of difference, but maybe just be consistent in whatever way you do it. And yeah, It's just going to wrap around every needle that it comes in its way, right? Just to make life a little more challenging. And now I'm going to pick up this first stitch now on that back needle, slip it off, pull through, make sure you get some good tension. And don't be surprised if you don't have to go back around the neck a second time just to kind of tuck things in. I'm going to try going through both of these just like it was a knitting needle, and just making sure you're not splitting your yarn along the way. This sheep geese is really great, but it does want to kind of hang up on itself when you're trying to pull it through like this. So which, you know, we like it because it does kind of meld with the next stitch, but there's a time and a place when it's like, oh, come on, let me just glide that yarn through there, and it doesn't want to do that real well sometimes. Okay, so did we get that stitch off of the needle? Make sure. No, I did not. So I'm going to slip that back stitch off. Okay, now we're ready to pick up this next stitch. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Ah, that's my 7th stitch, because that didn't get slipped off either. Okay, now back over here, pick up that front stitch. I'm just going to go ahead and slip it off. It seems like I can track what I'm doing a little better if I just do each one at a time. Okay, both of those are off of the needle, and we'll pull our yarn through. It's just going to catch on everything. What can I say? That's real life. All right, now next stitch, pick up off of the front needle, pick up off of the back needle. I'm very carefully holding on to these 2 needles so that I don't drop one and drop stitches. This is not where you want to drop stitches if you can keep from it. So I'm trying to be very careful with my left hand and not let loose of anything that I really don't want to. Okay, now I am putting a little tension on those stitches as I'm knitting them together around the neck here, hopefully not too much, and I honestly won't really know till we get this first set of stitches off of these needles here. Okay, let's see if I can pull this up this time without catching that needle. Well, see, it wanted to do it anyhow. I think it has a magnet in it or something. All right, pull this through. Let's hope it's no knots in it. Okay. Slip this first one off. And go to the next one. Right. Pull that through. I didn't catch that needle this time. Well, I didn't get in that stitch. It's a little tight. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and pull. I spoke too soon. I caught it the next time around. And come over here and get that stitch off. Okay, we've got one stitch on each of the needles right where we're supposed to be. Lift that one off, lift that one off, pull these through. And I don't know about you, but I'm really anxious to see what that looks like. Oh, and I can live with that. When we get that stuffed in that neck, I think that's going to be terrific. So now all we're going to do, and I'm not going to make you watch me do this next side because it's just going to be as tedious as the first side of the neck, and weaving those stitches together. We're just going to come over, snug this right up to where we left off on the other side, and come over, and this is a long end piece of yarn that I'm just not ready to weave in yet, but I'm gonna put it to the other side where it was. I don't want it on the outside. So I'm going to go ahead and now bring these stitches together here. Not that side, this up here, Linda. I was going to say, where'd my needle go? That's the side we just got through. So now this is going to get tucked in real close to this. I'll just get it lined up here so you can see what I'm going to do. Just like the other side, and we're going to be sewing that, weaving that together, whatever you want to call what we just did, and then this head will be on, and I'm going to do that, and but off video, and I'll come right back on. Okay, he is all attached. The head is to the body. I am very happy with that. That's totally within my tolerance of what's going to work. Now I have this seam back here to sew up, and the little bit here under the chin, and I'm going to sew this up next, and then I'll put some stuffing in and start getting the head stuffed, and then I will show you how I do the little reinforced piece. I've done it on some other videos, but I'm going to add it here to this one so that the neck is not wobbly. And I'm going to actually maybe show you that next, because really it's up to you to put it in whenever that works for you. I will be putting it as soon as I get these sewn up and a little stuffing in there, then I will be putting it up under here. I won't be putting it through this opening. I will get this sewed up, the head partially stuffed, and so I'm going to actually show you how I make it, and that'll be coming up next. Okay, I use batting. This actually is a poly pressed batting. It's probably about 1 inch thick. It's what I had. You could use something thinner. Thicker would be a little harder to work with. It can be a different type of batting. It could be oh my goodness, just about anything that you want to roll up is how I do it. And I take a piece that's maybe, oh, I don't measure, but let's say it's about 3 inches. And I think you could make this too short. So I would say it's about 5 inches in length. My scissors probably are not the sharpest in the world for this. Actually, it has a piece of tape on it, so that would definitely make them not work so well. So I'm going to say that's about a short 5 inches. I wouldn't go a lot shorter than that because you do want it to go up into the head a ways, and you want it to extend down into the body a little ways. So I'm going to show you just how, I mean, it's kind of crude. You don't have to be too careful. I'm going to use some dark thread so that you can see what I'm doing. And you want to take off a pretty generous, because I'm going to double it. And you want it to have some strength and stability. So I think these little scissors need some attention. And get out a sewing needle that's got a point on the end of it. So many of them in here are my, yeah, this one will work. A needle, any needle, just have a pointy needle. And since that end was so fuzzy, it's not going to work very well. Okay. This is pretty simple. I've heard people say they use straws and, oh, what else? I'm sure there's other craft supplies that would work also. I just want something that's not going to bend and then have a permanent bend in it. I'm looking for my other end of my thread here. I lost it on my table. Here. Make a little knot there. Actually, I want a pretty good sized knot because don't want it to pull through my, I cannot tell you how awkward I feel on the video sometimes. I don't have all these issues when I'm in my recliner chair. Okay, so here we go, my batting. And I'm going to roll it, and I'm going to roll it up just as tight as my fingers can make it. And I want to keep in mind that I don't want it bigger than what my neck opening is. And this will get snugged down tight because I do put a little batting around this. So this is not fancy. It is not even pretty. The point is you just want to make a cylinder that is going to give some stiffening to that neck. And I'm just going to go back through this just to get my first stitch secured. And I'm going to give it a couple of wraps. Just wrap it around. I'm going to go back through, secure it again. And really, I mean, you probably can come up with a much fancier way of doing this, but nobody sees this. Wrap a couple more wraps. Go back in there. Tighten my wrap back up. It's good to have a nice hard surface to work on. I'm gonna go back through. There's no right or wrong as to how many times. You just want to do it enough times that you know it's secure and going to stay secure while you're working with it. Once it's in the animal, it's never going to go anywhere. Okay, I've made this one plenty long. And it can go down into the body as far as you want it to go. There is no right or wrong, but just remember we're also going up in the head, so that eats some of it up too. And I'm just going to do a couple back and forths just to make sure that it's secured. Like I say, nothing fancy here at all. I don't even put a knot. There. That's how simple that is. That's my neck. And like I say, you could take fabric and roll it up. I like this because there's some bend to it, but it comes back, holds its shape. And once I get to the head stuffed, I'm just going to take this and push it right up in there in the neck opening, and it can be right up against it because this just feels like stuffing. So just work it through, squish it down to get it through that opening. And but I don't want to put it up in there yet because I'm going to be doing some stuffing and getting these closed up. But here you see that will be right about there. I'll put it up about that high into the head, and it just gives that whole little body some good stability and playability, don't have to worry about that head loosening up. It's just not going to put, and it actually saves tension up against this neck. It can be played with, and you don't have to worry about that neck coming unsewed or anything, because this is really going to help stabilize that. Our little guy is all ready here to have some stuffing. Now I have left some strands of yarn here that I might use for finish sewing up, and or I will just anchor them when I get to this point. But right now I've got some strands that I can use for sewing up some seams if I want here for the back of the head. But I'm just not gonna cut everything real short right at this point in time. So I'm gonna get some stuffing ready. This really is not that tricky. I fluff it up, kind of pull it apart a little bit. And that's how I work with the polyester that we talked about in the earlier videos when we were stuffing the legs. But I just get some up in there in the top of the head, pack it. I have not put the neck stiffening in yet. Want to get a little going here in the head, in the snout, get a little shape going, and a little at a time. I think that that's probably the most, there's no secret here, but maybe helpful thing is to kind of get your stuffing fluffed up and not try to work with, you know, just too thick, too much at a time. And just work with it. And it's amazing, actually, how much stuffing goes into one of these little critters. Now, I put my eyes on it the last. I know it would be real easy just to sew them on there, but I like to do it at the end after there's stuffing in, because then you can kind of get a little more shaping to the head. You can use that tension running from eye to eye with the buttons, get a little tension, and I think it just kind of helps sculpture the head in general. But you could sew it on now if you wanted to do that. Nothing wrong. That's all personal preference. Now I'm going to put a little bit more in to this head, remembering that I'm going to, you know, get that neck stiffening in there, and I have to think about the fact that I'm going to be sewing this seam up, and I'm probably pretty close to wanting to sew that seam up, but I'm going to put a little bit more in the head, and once I get this seam back here sewn, then I will be putting the, let's call it the neck stiffener in. And but I just want to get a good feel for this head and start sculpturing it a little bit and kind of, you know, just play with it and see what the yarn will do. Now, I have not done any blocking, and I'll be real truthful to you. I do very little blocking on these critters. I just, with this sheep G's, I have not found that it required that, but that's just what I've experienced. So you can block, there's nothing wrong with it. I certainly have blocked some of the clothing with the sheep G's because I just wanted maybe, you know, an edge to lay down, or just obvious with a flatter object. But with these bodies and legs that are getting stuffed, that's just been my experience. But I also knit at a tighter gauge, so that might be another reason why I'm not having to do any blocking. I use a smaller needle, and so my knitting overall is tighter. I don't know if that makes a difference or not. So that's probably all I'm going to put in the head right now before I sew up this back seam. But I'm the next step that I will be doing, and I'm just going to go ahead and show you now. I'm feeding this little neck stiffener. Right, find the opening there. I'm going to feed it up through the neck. Excuse me. and get his chin out of the way so I can get that in there. And just kind of push from the bottom up. There it is in the head. I want a little more up in the head. So now you can see there is that stiffening that I put in there, and I'm going to go ahead and work with it in there now, because I want to get some stiffening or stiffening. I want to get some stuffing around it so that you won't even feel it from the outside. It'll just be tucked in there, and it'll have stuffing all the way around. And so I'm going to get it pushed up in there so it stays stabilized. So you want it, if you have to make a hole up in there with your finger for that to slip into, to be in the middle of the head, whatever it takes. Just, you can play with these and work with them, squeeze them, whatever you need to do. And once I get that head stuffed, then of course I'm going to now next be closing that little seam up, get more stuffing in, close it up, and then you can push stuffing up through this opening up into that neck area. So that's all pretty self-explanatory. I use my chopstick for help moving the stuffing around. The other tool that I use is this with the point. It helps me just go in there and pick up and move that stuffing around when I want to get a little bit, move some of it around if I feel like I've got too much one place or another. So I think you can kind of see how all that's going to go together, and I'm going to go ahead and get this video posted. I'll do another video where we actually get the eyes on, get the embroidery for the mouth on, do the embroidery here on the hands. But I'm going to go ahead and stuff this. You'll see it on the next video fully stuffed. So I'm anxious to see some of your pictures and see what's happening. So please do post if you've, some of you that have made more of these, maybe you're already done with yours. But do post pictures. It's been really, really fun. So we'll come back and see you on, I think that will be, this is video 7. So of course the following one will be video 8.